Before we start the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know, which cities are you watching us from today? Drop them in the comments. I'd always enjoy seeing the map light up with all your hometowns. Have you ever gone to talk about something as simple as your child's progress, only to leave with your heart racing in ways you never expected? That's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday, and it changed how I see my son, his coach, and even myself. I was sitting in the bleachers of the small gym where my son's basketball team practiced, the smell of polished wood and the faint tang of sweat filling the air. The gym wasn't large, but it had this warm, lived-in quality, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and little victories mattered. I clutched my coffee cup, trying to appear casual, while my son, Jake, darted around with the ball, laughing with his teammates. He had always been full of energy, the kind that made me both proud and exhausted at the same time. Coach Ryan had asked to speak with me about Jake's progress. I wasn't sure what to expect, maybe a rundown of stats, advice on drills, or even a gentle warning if Jake had been slacking. But when he motioned for me to step aside, there was something in his tone, a quiet gravity, that made me follow him to a quieter corner of the gym. "Thanks for meeting with me," he began, his eyes avoiding mine for just a moment before focusing intently. His presence was calm, steady, someone who seemed to understand the weight of responsibility without needing to shout it from the rooftops. "Jake's a good player, really talented, but there's something else I wanted to mention, something I think you should know." I tilted my head, curiosity piqued, feeling a little flutter of nerves. "Oh, what's that?" He took a deep breath, and I noticed a subtle vulnerability in his posture, something I hadn't seen in him before. "It's about Jake. I've noticed. He really looks up to you, more than I think he does with most parents. And it's affecting him, in a good way. He's more focused, more driven, when he knows you're watching and supporting him. But he's also sensitive to your mood. I guess I wanted to tell you that because it matters more than just stats on a scoreboard." His words struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. A mix of pride and surprise bubbled up in my chest. I had always thought I was just a parent trying to do my best, but hearing it framed this way, through the eyes of someone who knew my son on a different level, was both humbling and oddly intimate. I found myself smiling, almost laughing quietly at the unexpected turn. I had no idea. I just tried to cheer him on, I guess. Coach Ryan nodded, a small, knowing smile crossing his face. "And that's exactly why it works. You're present for him, not just physically, but emotionally. That's rare, and it makes a difference." As he spoke, I felt a quiet connection, not just to him, but to this shared understanding of caring for someone else. There was respect in his words, a subtle acknowledgement of the effort it takes to be present in a child's life. I realized then that this conversation wasn't just about basketball. It was about empathy, attention, and the ways we influence those we love without even realizing it. We lingered in that corner for a few more minutes, talking about Jake's habits, his strengths, and even the little quirks that made him uniquely him. It wasn't a lecture or a performance review. It was a conversation between two people who genuinely cared about a young boy's growth. And by the time I left the gym that evening, I felt an unexpected sense of warmth and reflection that stayed with me long after the echo of bouncing basketballs faded. Little did I know that conversation would only be the beginning of a series of moments that would challenge my assumptions, deepen my emotional connections, and open my eyes to parts of myself I hadn't acknowledged in years. After that first conversation with Coach Ryan, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. His words lingered in my mind like the echo of a bell in a quiet hall. I found myself watching Jake more closely during practices, noticing the little things. How his brow furrowed when he struggled with a shot, how he perked up when I clapped or called his name. I'd always cared about him, of course, but now I felt a new layer of responsibility, a subtle weight that was both thrilling and intimidating. A week later, Ryan asked if I could stay after practice to talk again. This time it wasn't just a quick chat in a corner. It felt intentional, almost like he needed the space to explain something more. The gym had emptied out, leaving only the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic squeak of sneakers across the polished floor. There was a calmness to the moment that contrasted with the chaos of the practice, and I realized how rare it was to find a pause like this in the middle of our busy lives. "Thanks for coming back," Ryan said, leaning against the edge of the bleachers. He had a notebook in hand, which he flipped through casually, but his eyes kept returning to mine. "I wanted to show you something about Jake, something you might not see from the stands." Curiosity pricked at me again. I had expected charts or drills, maybe notes on his performance, but instead he pulled up a video on his tablet. It was Jake during the last game, moving with a kind of focus and energy I hadn't realized he was capable of. Ryan paused it at several moments, pointing out subtle decisions Jake had made on the court, how he anticipated passes, how he communicated with his teammates, how he didn't just play but led in small, meaningful ways. "It's impressive," Ryan said quietly. "But more than that, it shows how much he's grown. And I think a big part of that is because of you. You don't just show up, you're engaged. You make him feel seen, valued, and capable. That's rare, and it matters more than any stat." Hearing him say that, I felt warmth spreading through my chest. I wasn't used to compliments like this, especially from someone I respected as much as Ryan. There was no arrogance, no hint of flattery, just a sincere acknowledgement that made me pause and take stock of my own efforts. I never thought about it like that," I admitted. "I just try to be there, you know." Ryan smiled, a softness in his gaze that caught me off guard. "And that's why it works. Jake feels it. You've created a space where he can thrive, not just in basketball, but in how he sees himself." We lingered there for a while, talking about more than just stats or game strategy. We shared small stories about Jake, funny habits, stubborn streaks, moments that revealed who he really was. It felt natural, easy, as if we were two adults discovering something new together while honoring the young boy at the center of it all. And then, almost without realizing it, the conversation shifted. Ryan shared a little about his own journey, how he had struggled to connect with his parents as a kid, how certain mentors had shaped him. There was honesty in his words, a vulnerability that I hadn't expected, but that made me feel closer to him, in a way that was deeply human and profoundly respectful. By the time I left the gym that evening, my mind was buzzing, not just with thoughts about Jake, but with reflections on connection, guidance, and trust. It was strange, in a way, to feel so moved by someone who was, technically, just my son's coach. But in that quiet corner of the gym, we had shared something rare, a mutual understanding of how love, attention, and presence can shape a life. I realized that the most meaningful growth, Jake's and my own, wasn't just on the scoreboard. It was in these quiet, unexpected moments where hearts met, understanding was exchanged, and respect deepened. And I couldn't help but wonder what the next practice would reveal. The following week, I found myself arriving at the gym earlier than usual. The air was crisp outside, a hint of winter sneaking in through the open doors, and the familiar scent of polished wood and faint sweat welcomed me as I stepped inside. I felt a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. I wasn't sure why exactly, but the conversations with Ryan had left a quiet mark on me. Jake was already on the court, practicing layups with a focus that made my chest swell with pride. He caught sight of me and waved, his grin lighting up the space. "Mom, did you see that shot?" I nodded, smiling. "I did. Great job." After practice, Ryan motioned me over again. This time it was to the small lounge area just off the court, with worn leather chairs and a low table stacked with notebooks and training guides. The space felt intimate, a private little corner away from the noise and chaos of the gym. "I hope I'm not keeping you too long," Ryan said, his voice steady but carrying that same quiet intensity I had come to recognize. "Not at all," I replied. "I like these talks." He pulled up a chair and gestured for me to sit. I noticed how the light caught his eyes in a way that made them seem almost softer than usual, and I felt a strange warmth in the pit of my stomach. He opened his notebook and began talking about Jake, not just his progress, but the subtler things. His confidence, his way of leading quietly, how he responded to challenges both on and off the court. "What I really wanted to share," Ryan said, leaning forward slightly, "is that these moments, small as they seem, matter more than you realize. Jake looks to you not just for encouragement, but for a model of patience, focus, and care. He trusts you, and that's shaping him in ways that practice alone never could." I swallowed, the words settling in like a gentle weight. It was rare to feel seen in this way, to have someone recognize the quiet, sometimes unnoticed effort I put into being present for my son. Ryan's sincerity wasn't just comforting, it was almost grounding. I don't know what to say," I admitted softly. "It means a lot to hear that, truly." He smiled, a small, knowing expression that didn't feel like a smile at all, but more like a quiet acknowledgement. "You don't need to say anything. I just wanted you to know what I see, because it's important, and Jake deserves to have people who notice him in the right ways." There was a pause, a calm silence between us that didn't feel awkward. Instead, it was intimate in the way that honest human connection often is, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual understanding, of shared care for someone else's well-being. I realized in that moment how unusual it was to connect like this with another adult, especially one whose primary connection to me was through my child. Yet, it felt natural, easy, and profoundly respectful. I could feel my own walls softening, just enough to allow the depth of the conversation to sink in. Before leaving, Ryan handed me a folded piece of paper, nothing formal, just a list of suggestions for helping Jake at home with his focus and confidence. But it felt like more than advice. It felt like trust, like an invitation into a partnership built on respect and care. Walking out of the gym that evening, the winter air biting at my cheeks, I couldn't help but reflect on how rare these moments of connection were. Between cheering for my son and listening to Ryan, I had discovered something about myself. The joy of being truly seen, of being part of a quiet but meaningful journey in someone else's life. And deep down, I knew the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. A few weeks later, the season was winding down, and the gym had a different feel, less frantic, more contemplative. The team was practicing for one of their last games, the kind that carried the bittersweet weight of endings and beginnings. I sat on the bleachers, my coffee long gone, and watched Jake move across the court with a confidence and focus that made my chest swell. After practice, Ryan approached me again. There was a quiet energy about him, a calmness that carried both authority and warmth. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. "Of course," I said, following him to the same little lounge area we'd come to know as our corner of honesty and reflection. The room felt familiar, like an extension of the conversations we'd shared over the past weeks, a small, safe space where understanding and care had quietly flourished. Ryan sat down and gestured for me to do the same. "I just wanted to say, it's been a pleasure working with you as much as with Jake. You've created a space for him to grow, and it's been incredible to witness. But there's something I've noticed about you too. You've been learning about patience, trust, and presence, even without realizing it." I felt a warmth rise in me, a mix of surprise and gratitude. "I've learned a lot from watching him, and from listening to you," I admitted. "I never expected these talks to mean this much. I thought we were just talking about basketball, but it's more." Ryan nodded, a soft, thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Exactly. More. And that's what makes this season memorable. not just the wins or even the improvement, but these quiet moments of growth and understanding. We talked for a while longer, sharing small stories, reflections, and even laughter. It was remarkable how natural it felt to converse like this, two adults connected through care for a child, discovering a mutual respect that went beyond surface-level interaction. There was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just honesty, presence, and human connection. Before leaving, I watched Jake talking to his teammates, offering encouragement, giving high fives, and making subtle adjustments during practice. He was different now, more confident, more assured, more aware of himself. And I realized something profound. The lessons he had learned weren't just about basketball. They were about presence, empathy, and understanding the people who support you. Walking out of the gym that evening, I felt a sense of calm and gratitude unlike anything I had anticipated. Life, I realized, was made of these quiet, unexpected moments. Conversations that seemed ordinary, but ended up reshaping how we saw ourselves and each other. And as I glanced back at the emptying gym, I knew this chapter of our lives. Our little world of basketball, trust, and connection had changed me forever. I was more patient, more aware, more open to the unexpected lessons life could offer. And I hoped that through it all, Jake would carry these lessons with him long after the final buzzer of the season had sounded. Some moments, I thought, were small but eternal. And some connections, once formed, had a way of staying with you, quietly shaping who you are and who you can become.